Welcome to Do What Matters Most. This is the fourth episode in the series, Parent Leadership for 21st Century Children. Turning your family into a learning lab will do great things for your family. First, it will be more fun and engaging for you as a parent. And second, you can learn how to promote character development and healthy gender identities, improve your children's abilities to learn, teach emotional self-reliance, and prepare your children for the world of work they will face. Making your family a learning lab is worth the effort. Visit mattersmostmedia.org to find more about the podcast and firstanswers.com to find tons of parenting resources.
In part one of the idea of making your family a learning lab, I proposed to you that there were conditions which we call the family environment. It's the inner quality of the sum total of all the emotions and communication patterns that go on inside families. Those of us who have had the privilege of studying families discover how complex, how interesting, and sometimes how truly amazing the events are that take place inside families, ranging from long-term influence over a period of years where the children and parents live together, from very small kinds of activities and so on. I hired a young man to help out with the yard work in my home, and we were talking one day about work, and he said, well, my dad said that there were two things important. I wanted to know what those were, of course, and he said it was effort and respect. And the idea is that if you want to be successful in your life at work or so on, you would give good effort and you would respect the people you work for. What was interesting to me, however, was that this father probably just made a statement one day to this son, and the son remembered it. Now, if you were like me and you spend time with families where the children typically do not listen or pretend that they don't listen to their parents, then you could understand why it was important to me to have this young man say, well, my dad said this and he now is following it. He learned it and he's respecting and appreciating it. It was a great example to me, and I've pondered about it since, as you can tell. And I believe that there are many things like simple statements, some of mine where it's better to keep up than catch up, or make sure that you don't give up what you want most for what you want at the moment. My mother used to write to me when I was in college and give me sample statements. One was that if I prepared the tools, God would provide the work, and then she would send encouragements to me like, you can do it and I have confidence in you, and over time that meant a great deal to me. But in this episode, the second episode of Making Your Family a Learning Lab, I'd like to concentrate on some things that, in my opinion, in the world we live in today are much more significant. And I'm not sure it's fair for me to say it's more significant than some of those important statements that add to our lives. But if we took a look at the conditions that children face nowadays, and we take a look at the conditions in the external environment, then some of the questions are, how can we use the conditions inside our family to make sure that our children learn the life lessons we'd like them to know and be successful and successfully traffic through the challenges and threats they face while they're growing up? So let me remind you of a couple of things. Your family environment is the sum of conditions supplied in the total mental, emotional, and physical family. And all family members help create and live in this environment. And even though you originate this as a parent and have a major role in deciding how it turns out, as children mature, they have gradually more influence in determining what happens. A child, for example, that has serious problems, like a teenager who has habit or behavioral problems, they exert more than their share of influence on all the members of their family. So in this family environment, I remind you it's children who achieve developmental tasks. They're growing, learning, developing, and so on. There's the family work, like chores and other kinds of activities, homework, and so on. There's relationships between parents and children and between the children. And these relationships are influential where social skills are learned, how to talk, how to cooperate, how to work together while kids are playing games and doing other family things. There's also a set of rule conditions, and these rule conditions can apply to social behavior, like what words you cannot say. For example, I was not permitted to say shut up in my family, and swear, and a bunch of other things, which I'm grateful for. And the rules might also apply to the social behavior of how I dress or go out into the world. I mentioned earlier that my mother didn't want me to leave and go on a day without a clean handkerchief. It's also true that the environment, it consists of things which exert influence that last over time and that occur in the family, and then they're supposed to occur outside the family. Now, there are some of those in terms of the development of children that are so significant. In my opinion, it's important for us to consider in this day and age exactly what we can do, what you can do as parents to make sure that these things are learned or take place inside your family so that they take place outside your family when children are away from you. Now, let's examine a few other things that will lead us to the point where I can tell you what some of those are. First of all, there's a network of repetitive communication patterns in your families. People and families communicate with each other, and when they communicate, their methods become part of a redundant pattern or sequence of some kind. For example, I could tape record your family meals and find that when certain topics are brought up, there's a speaking order where one person first talks, followed by another, interrupted by another, then another one corrects, and so on, and it becomes a pattern. These patterns are stable. They are like a steady state, which stabilizes and makes family life somewhat predictable. But this means that you could make your communication more constructive than less, more positive than negative, more accurate than inaccurate, and serve some purpose. In my practice, for example, I've seen individuals of multiple generations, sometimes three, if you can believe that. And I've noticed conditions in one family, then conditions in their offspring and their families. And I can tell you some of the things that are transmitted through time. A family's commitment to honesty is often little teeny lies. So a couple, a father and mother of the first generation may in fact find it easy to lie here, a little bit there, something else. And then I discover when working with their children that the member of that family comes into the marriage and he thinks it's okay to tell things that are not true as well. And then quite often in that generation, it is passed on. So I've learned that honesty or dishonesty is passed along. I've also discovered that our thoughts or ideas about work are passed on. The ideas of how constructive work should be, or whether or not it's you want to do the least work for the most money or something like that. And a lot of these attitudes are carried on. I want to address something else, which I'll bring up in a moment. Our family environment also is made up of what you bring in and what you screen out. It seems, or at least it should seem obvious, that what you bring into your family will influence your children. It is also the case that what you screen out will influence your children. That is, prevent them from participating or understanding. Now, I'm quite confident in the world today you understand the significance of that, because most parents have to come up with some way of regulating the content of what children see on television or can get access to on their phones. Now, to understand this, and take a look at magazines, newspapers, and the media which you allow into your family and what you attempt to screen out. This will identify some of what you value and what you don't, and will also indicate what you want your children to learn and what you want them to avoid. In my home, there were church magazines and scriptures and very good books. There was nothing ever close to pornography brought into my home. And there weren't even playing cards for a lot of years, believe that. And there were other kinds of things that my parents thought were bad and they didn't want inside our family or talked about. My mother wouldn't let us gossip about people, and we couldn't talk about people in a negative light. Now, in addition to the network of repetitive communication and what you bring in and what you screen out, you have also the example, your and your leadership. And this whole idea is based on the idea that you as parents acquire authority and the power to exert leadership, hopefully that your children will willingly follow. Now, this happens not by the larger size or your ability to impose control, but by virtue of your skills and the fact that you apply them to promote the development of your children. This also does not mean that to be a good parent, you must be totally skillful or do everything perfectly. Families are imperfect typically, and they're imperfect environments where people are busy growing and learning and trying to become better. In that sense, you undergo a great deal of development and growth along with your children. Now, I want to emphasize among the first things that parents should do is to recognize that your family is a source of learning unequaled by any place or situation, and that you can organize your family to provide survival, support, and opportunities to learn. Then you also can skillfully promote the growth of your children by using the available work, rule conditions, and relational experiences. Now, you might be a bit overwhelmed here, but not to worry. You just have to use the idea to think of your family as a laboratory for promoting children's successful development. Now, let me give you some examples. Here are things that I think you would be very interested in knowing how to promote in your family. Number one is the character of your children. Teaching them to be honest or to be forthright or to have good values or to be able to have moral courage and stand up for things that they believe in and to maybe protest the things that they don't. But character formation typically takes place in your family in two ways. The private individual knowledge that your children acquire about themselves, how they're treated by siblings, and how they're treated by the parents, stays with them for a long time. In the last 25 years, we've learned that abuse and other kinds of terrible experiences, as well as positive and constructive treatment by parents of their children, it lasts a long time, and it influences the quality of character and how much children feel that it is important for them to contribute to other people. What exists in your family, for example, can teach responsibility for self, the ability to achieve and grow. And then you must understand that you have your role as a disciplinarian, a communicator, a teacher, and a mentor, and your family and your children will also be affected by your efforts to take advantage of children's talents and abilities. Now, besides character, let me give you something else that is involved. Today, one of the big issues is gender identity. And it should be obvious, and probably is to everybody, that gender is one of the very first things that parents deal with. Is it a boy? Is it a girl? Well, I just read a little article that's where the MD suggested that parents need to start on gender identity when their child is an infant and make sure that they're learning about what female is and femininity is and what masculinity is and what maleness is, and learn to help your children feel confident and successful. When talking with parents about children who have gender dysphoria and other kinds of problems, one of the individuals who was thinking of being a trans man, said, "Why aren't my parents happy with me? Why aren't they willing to love and so on?" And I said, "I think they're willing to love you, but you need to understand that there probably isn't one single parent who wants a child to grow up and struggle with gender dysphoria." Well, gender identity is learned inside families to begin with, and some of the profound lessons for it are learned there, or they're not. It's just simply not true that all of the factors which determine gender identity are inherited. It is not the case. There is no conclusive evidence that exists to make that so. There might be some predispositions, but these predispositions do not have to determine the eventual outcome. Now, what that means is that then you can, through your example and your leadership, have a role in determining the kinds of attitudes and experiences that your children have about their identity. Now, it isn't just about gender as maleness in contrast to femaleness. It's not about that only. While you can help children identify positive qualities for each, What matters in families has to do with love or kindness or good communication or warmth, and that is connected to gender. When gender problems typically occur where parents are blind to the effects of their family, and when these other positive conditions are absent. Here's something else, a third condition that is influenced in your family. We live in what is called the information age. And this information age means that children are being invited, you too as parents, to process information much faster and it needs to be of higher quality. Some people, some authors now suggest that in a typical day, people process as many as 70 to 80 full-size newspapers a day. Well, this means that the media conditions and the information technology that we're faced with are presenting us with a necessity to get brains that can keep up. Now, I have not taught at a elementary school or in a high school, but I've spent a lot of years teaching at a university. And I can tell you that what happens because of the type of students coming into your classrooms, that teachers are faced with the need to pick it up, to present better and higher quality information because the kids are prepared for that. And I can also tell you that our children who are better able to process information are the ones who are going to have the greatest opportunities for success in the future, or certain kinds of success. I want to correct that so that I understand that you know that I believe there are many kinds of success. But we want children to be successful in their world, and we want them to be successful of helping their children grow, which turns out to be your grandchildren. So in your family, you can help your children learn to be effective learners. I'd like to tell you about an experience that I had. Years ago in my practice, I was seeing a lot of kids who had been apparently defeated by their experience in the public school. They thought they were dumb because their grades weren't good. They didn't have motivation. They didn't want to go to school. And their parents said, "Would you please help them?" There were so many of them, as a matter of fact, that I decided that I could do better by starting a little program that I called Knowledge Gain. And over 10 years, by having students come and the teachers come to help them 3 at a time. And at first we started doing drill, which we took the subjects they were deficient and did the drill, helped them learn better and so on. Students didn't seem to improve a great deal until something fundamental happened. It was this. And the reason for telling you this is that you can do this in your family. When the students learned how they learned, how their brain worked and what they did to learn this and what they did to learn that, suddenly learning became very interesting to them. I'll remember forever this teenage boy who walked into my office, sat down, slumped down, and he said, "I'm not doing well in school." And I said, "Do you feel dumb?" And he said, "Well, yeah, I guess I am." And I said, "Well, do you think it's permanent or do you think it's temporary?" And he laughed and he said, "Well, I hope it's temporary." And so I said, "It probably is." And so we went to work. And a few weeks later, after learning his own learning methods, he came into my office and said, "Look," he had a school transcript and had straight A's. I wish I could give the emphasis that idea actually deserves. When children learn how they learn, how their brain works, and what it does to actually process information, then they are more motivated and more exceptional in the ability to learn. Here's the fourth thing that you can have some role in your family. It has to do with emotional reliance. You know, because it's spread everywhere, that in the days in which we live, children are faced with pressure and stress, and quite often they don't have the kind of environment that is supportive and nurturing, and so they are often filled, a higher percent of them are filled with depression and anxiety. I have seen and am seeing in my practice teenage kids who are suicidal, teenage kids who feel so discouraged about life that they don't think it has any opportunities for them. Or I see kids, usually boys, who just drift, not committed to much of anything, and they're drifting along doing something. This happens because somewhere along the line, they did not learn the tools and the skills that make them emotionally self-reliant. And it's so easy to do if you could learn about it. You can learn about that, for example, on a website called firstanswers.com, and learn what you could do inside your family to promote this emotional self-reliance. If you have a child who's vulnerable to depression, this program will save you a lot of emotional pain. In your family, it is possible for your children to learn a lot of attitudes about work and about themselves as workers, which extend beyond your family to positions of employment. Now, let's suppose that we're at a time where kids are faced with the following things. Number one, they must learn, because the world of work is moving so fast that what children learn as they graduate from high school and college just doesn't keep up with how fast the conditions are where people are at work. Number two is that they need to learn inside in their abilities so that when they get a job, they can learn and innovate and be creative and help out their business. Why is that necessary? Because we're seeing a lot of young people be unsuccessful at finding jobs, first of all, and then keeping them. And so what you can teach your children and your family are positive attitudes about work and how to start, how to finish, and be effective. You could, for example, learn about assertive learning skills, where you ask a child to estimate how long it will take him to finish the work, give them some idea about how quickly and how much they can learn. And in these assertive learning skills, they develop skills in your family that they can take with them in the rest of the world. Now, why do all of this? I sometimes think, why am I doing this? Well, I have seen both the good and the not so good. And I have seen the good, and I'm thrilled with that. When young men and young women grow and come out of families and take their place in the world that are talented and able, I look at them and I think, wow, we could use 100 billion of those kinds of individuals in our world. And then when I see the ones that are struggling and potentially have significant problems that will last a long time, it is heartbreaking for me. I admit that I used to cry over some of these kids. I've walked the halls of hospitals too often. I've even spoken at funerals of some kids who took their own life. And it's not a simple matter to me, and it's something that I've never taken casually. I worry about our kids, and I worry about our families. I hope you will turn your family into a strategic learning lab where the most important things of life that you value can be taught there, and you can learn how to do it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Do What Matters Most, which is sponsored by firstanswers.com, where you can find new tools for families and parents of 21st century kids with a focus on emotional self-reliance. Visit firstanswers.com to sign up for a free newsletter. Find Do What Matters Most on Facebook and our website, mattersmostmedia.org, where you can ask Dr. Scoresby your own questions. Remember to subscribe to stay up to date with new episodes. Give us a rating and write a review on the podcast app or Google Podcasts, and let us know what you think about Do What Matters Most.